Motown sounds seeping from the underground clubs of the 1970s, now on BBC4, escaping a bleak reality with a dose of northern soul.
The Northern Soul phenomenon was the most exciting underground British club movement of the 1970s. In its heyday, white working-class youth in the north of England travelled hundreds of miles across the region to dance to obscure black American soul records until the break of dawn.
You had a purpose in life. You know, you're always looking to hear that next record. You're always like, you know, looking forward to the buzz of the weekend.
It was just excitement. It was just euphoria.
Everybody was there for one reason only, and that was the music. Nothing else mattered.
With its roots in mod culture of the previous decade, Northern Soul created a genuine antidote to desperate, dead-end times.
Everybody worked in a factory. Everybody worked at the pit. I didn't know anybody who worked in offices.
You know, you've got one night a week and you're going to just do everything that you wanted to do all week in that one night.
It became a way of life, with its own completely unique fashions and dance styles.
If you went to a club and saw someone do a big high kick, you would try and outkick that person by kicking higher.
Northern Soul DJs believed they were creating a radical alternative to mainstream British culture.
We found our own records in defiance of the market, in defiance of Radio 1, in defiance of the newspapers, in defiance of the media, and in great defiance of Top of the Pops.
But the joyful unity between the northern clubs was shattered by bitter infighting.
When the rivalries were very intense, there's no two ways about that. They talk about the north-south split. This was a north-north split.
Today, in the 21st century, Northern Soul is being discovered by a brand new generation and experiencing a glorious revival. But it was back in the 70s that a strange, exotic flower pushed its way up through the concrete of northern England and changed people's lives.
Late 50s, the Midlands and the North were grim. We still worked 44 hours a week. A Saturday morning was part of our working week. Working men's clubs would have been the predominant form of entertainment.
Grimy, smoky, no glamour whatsoever.
The older generation, my parents would go to bingo or the local Liberal club for a comedian and the turn. That was people's entertainment.
There was no club scene in the early 1960s in the north of England. There were ballrooms where live bands usually played and people went and danced. There were covers bands that played in halls and not very much else.
But down south, a budding youth movement that would later inspire the Northern Soul scene was emerging in the twilight world of London's Soho and West End.
The birth of club culture began, I guess, with the mods or the modernists, the kids who gave you a glimpse of the future. They were looking for something new and different. They didn't want to listen to the music of their parents.
And they wanted to hear originally modern jazz, but then it moved on to blue beat and R&B. And what they wanted to hear were the original records.
It was at underground venues like the Flamingo in Soho where these sharp-dressed mods danced to black American soul records all night until the break of dawn. They were also falling in love with the exciting new sounds of Motown, a Detroit-based label whose soul releases were now dominating the American charts.
It
It was, I love you, darling, you hurt me, I hurt you, let's get back together, with a thumping great beat and a bloody great chorus to sing along to.
It was refreshing. If nowadays you look at the lyrics, they were very sad. But it had that uptown beat.
It's got a do-do-do-do-do sort of beat to it, but it's got those lovely chords. So a new music form was found with a rock beat and jazz chords, because the chords uplift your mood and make you feel happy or wistful on a rock beat. That's the Motown sound.
The Motown sound was hugely popular in the USA and very widely imitated. But in the UK, apart from the occasional chart hit, its artists initially struggled to gain anything like their stateside success.
Radio 1 didn't start broadcasting until 1967, so all through the heyday of Tamla Motown, there wasn't a proper station for young people. In those days, you really had to go to record stores or tune into pirate stations to hear black American music.
So when the pirate radio ships came along, we were given a lot of freedom to play the music we liked. I made sure that I wanted to play black soul music.
People do forget, now that music is ubiquitous in our society, it was the opposite in the 1960s. It didn't fall on your lap. It wasn't something that accompanied TV adverts. It was something that you had to go and seek out.
By the mid-1960s, London's mod culture, with its love of dancing all night to little-known soul records, was infiltrating the north.
The mod had the Flamingo and other clubs, and it slowly transferred north. So it'd work its way up the country by people from, say, Market Harborough or Leicester or Doncaster. One or two people from that town catching the train to London and bringing something back.
A crucial destination in the north was Manchester's Twisted Wheel. This club was a rare oasis for mods in the region. A young Pete Waterman stumbled across the Twisted Wheel when visiting the city for a football match.
It was one of those things when you went, oh my God, what is this? This is amazing. You know, I was hearing stuff that I'd never heard before, but I knew what it was. And I remember catching the train the next day, and I must have been very quiet all the way back thinking, where do I go and get them records?
Across the Peak District in Sheffield, promoter and DJ Peter Stringfellow was creating a similar all-nighter at the Mojo Club.
Every Saturday night, that was it. The whole neighbourhood was boom, 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 boom. And they would stay until 10 o'clock Sunday morning. They were taking these things called blueies, and off they would go. And I think there was a wild one called the Black Bomber, which would keep you dancing for a week.
It was these small underground venues like Sheffield's Mojo and Manchester's Twisted Wheel, with their culture of dancing all night to black music, that were now sowing the seeds of what would become Northern Soul. Down south, pop culture was changing at an increasingly dramatic pace. 1967 was the year that psychedelic rock exploded, but it wasn't embraced by everyone.
The reason psychedelia didn't work in the north is because it was too industrial. There's just no way that you could tune in and drop out in the north when on a Monday you've got to go and work in the steelworks in Scunthorpe. What they needed was an escape for the weekend.
Peter Stringfellow attempted to introduce psychedelia into the underground soul clubs of the north.
It was 1967. I was wearing a kaftan and flowers. I walked on stage and I was playing my kind of flower power music. If you ever go to San Francisco, and I'm throwing flowers, and they were throwing Pepsi-Cola bottles back at me. Get off! String, what are you doing, String? Get off, it's rubbish.
As Stringfellow discovered, the mods in the North did not want to change.
They weren't interested in Jefferson Airplane. They wanted to continue taking amphetamines and dancing to R&B music. And the amphetamines had an effect of the music speeding up. Anyone on amphetamines tends to be talking 10 to the dozen, and likewise with the music became faster and faster.
It was these up-tempo soul stompers with their non-stop 4/4 beat that created the blueprint for Northern Soul. I Can't Help Myself by Motown act The Four Tops epitomised this style.
One, two, three, four. 1, 2, 3, 4. 'Cause I love you. All the way through. Doesn't let up. That's all it is. It is absolutely, the beat is not complicated. There's no swing elements. There is no none of that. There's no swing elements. There's no time signature changes. This is just a straight beat. I can't help myself.
It's important because it's almost a template for what became Northern Soul. It has the yearning vocal, it has the beautiful orchestration, and it has the snare on every beat.
Then you get to the chorus, I can't help myself, I love you and nobody else. It's just everybody sings along because everybody understands the message. And everybody's bouncing about to a beat, singing a sad song. It's brilliant.
And that became the kind of signifier of every great Northern Soul stomper. So the really up-tempo records that were known in the Northern Soul scene were pretty much all based on that kind of sound. The Four Tops, I Can't Help Myself.
Nobody else.
But as these up-tempo tracks became the records of choice at the budding Northern Soul clubs, times and music were changing in Black America.
Some people say we got a lot of malice, some say it's a lot of nerve.
This time, you know, there was the riots in Watts, there was protests at the '68 Olympics, the assassination of Martin Luther King. There were people who became radicalized, there were black GIs coming back from Vietnam with a new militancy.
Brother, we can't quit.
As the slower, tougher, more political James Brown funk began to dominate the Black American landscape, the faster, optimistic mid-60s Motown sound was now out of date. But soul fans in the north of England didn't like what they heard.
Musically, it was too off the wall and it was too slow to be consumed by 500 kids in a basement off their heads on French blues. They wanted something quicker, something faster, and funk wasn't it.
If the clubs in the north of England wanted to keep playing uplifting, up-tempo soul, they were now forced to look back into the past, sourcing their records from this mid-60s golden era of Motown, whose sound had been widely imitated across Black America.
Northern Soul started out as us looking for records with the Motown sound that weren't on Motown. And the more they had flopped, the more they were a B-side that no one had ever seen before, the more desirable they became. So we went looking for flops or B-sides of obscure records that no one had ever heard of.
On one hand, you got the highly polished, industrialized music machine like Motown, but lower down the food chain, you know, there were these little artists in the back of nowhere, so badly recorded. Most of them are little more than demos. But what appeals is the honesty and the integrity and the truth. I guess that's what people love about them.
At the end of the decade, clubs like Manchester's Twisted Wheel were mining this mid-60s period for forgotten soul records and playing them at their all-nighters for the very first time.
Baby.
I would say the landmark record for the Twisted Wheel would be a record by Leon Haywood called Baby Reconsider. That was the tip of the iceberg for what we were then to see over the next 4 or 5 years, an absolute landslide of amazing American imports.
When you had a record like Baby Reconsider, everybody wanted to dance to. Everybody. There was no other club in England you could hear it, so they had to travel to the Wheel to hear this music.
Ian Levine, from an affluent Blackpool family, was just a teenager when he had his very first Twisted Wheel experience.
It was in a stone cellar painted black with wheels on the wall, and the heat hit you because people smoked in the club. The nicotine and sweat was dripping off the ceiling, literally like stalactites of brown-coloured gunge. And everybody was on that floor clapping on the beat. Dun, 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 dun. Not like some bunch of mum and dads at a wedding, but so sharply clapping to every beat. That was Northern Soul. Bob Brain and the Concords, More of Your Love, at the Twisted Wheel. That was it. There was no going back from that point.
Other clubs in the North, inspired by the Twisted Wheel, were setting up their own high-octane soul all-nighters.
When we were going to the all-nighters, it was a special club. You could leave Huddersfield, and on the train, you get the people from Leedsgate on, the girls from Dewsbury. We get on Huddersfield. You just knew people that would be on the train. We're all part of the same group. We're going to the same club.
Here we had underground American black music taking over and producing the culture that became Northern Soul. Although at this time, nobody called it Northern Soul. It was just excitement.
But this was about to change.
It needed some sort of tag to identify it. The story goes that Dave Godin, who had a record shop in London called Soul City Records, on a weekend, people from the north, maybe in town to watch Manchester United at West Ham, who knows, would take the time to go into his shop and ask for a certain type of sound, I suppose, soul sound.
And of course Dave was in the middle of London where the culture was very much James Brown, very much the funkier side of sounds. And kids from the north would go down and ask for faster records. And Dave got to understand that this was happening not just occasionally, but week in, week out. And he realised that a different thing was developing in the north of England.
Before that, we called it rare soul, up-tempo soul. People said, what, like Motown? No, like Motown, but on different labels. You couldn't describe it, but Dave, by coining it, gave it an identity.
Hey girl, don't bother me now. Hey girl, stay away, girl. Come back another day, don't bother me.
The first signs that Northern Soul was becoming something more than a localised phenomenon was when certain old records began to be re-released and revived and to get into the charts. One is the Tams, Hey Girl Don't Bother Me.
They said you like to cheat.
Tony Blackburn had championed Hey Girl Don't Bother Me on the pirate radio stations back in the mid-60s when the record was originally released.
I could normally spot in those days a hit record, and I thought that one's going to be a really big hit, and it wasn't. It didn't make it. And it must have been about 6 or 7 years later, because of the Northern Soul scene, they suddenly discovered it up there and started playing it, and it actually forced it to becoming a #1 hit.
To the Tams' great surprise, they were invited over from America to perform their old song on Top of the Pops. But in 1971, the same year the Tams hit the top of the charts, Manchester's Twisted Wheel, the mother club of the emerging Northern Soul scene, was in trouble.
The drug squad became very aware of what was going on. The usual thing that would be levied against a venue like the Twisted Wheel would be it's a haven for people taking drugs, which of course really, whilst it was true, it wasn't the reason people were going there in the first place.
Manchester City Council was putting pressure on that there would be no more all-night dances within the city of Manchester. There was only one that I knew of, and that was the Twisted Wheel. So the police gunned for it, council gunned for it, so they closed it. And I thought, when that finished, then that was it. It was over. The good times had gone.
The North and Midlands was bleak. It was tough in the late 50s, but by the early 70s, it had gone into serious depression. We'd had strikes in the car industry, we'd had strikes in the pits. The North was being hung out to dry, there's no question. There were so many unemployed or people that couldn't make their living the way they'd made their living before. There was gloom and despondency all around.
So many patches of like waste ground because a lot of the mills were being knocked down at that time. And as kids, we all used to play on the waste ground.
I couldn't see any way of breaking out of the town I lived in. Everybody worked in a factory. Everybody worked at the pit. I didn't know anybody who worked in offices. Everybody seemed to be leaving school at 15.
When I was at school, I was asked, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to work for a record company. You know, this is like 15 years old in Mirfield. And they're like, we don't have many record companies in Mirfield, but you can work at the cement factory.
Well, I think the Northern Soul thing in that early period was the only hope that anybody had up north of getting out of it.
Ooh, girl, be my sweet darling.
It was on a quiet street in the town of Tunstall, close to its traditional pubs, that the underground spirit of Northern Soul was revived. Although the Torch had been operating for a number of years, in 1972, this club started its very first Northern Soul all-nighter.
It was strange because it was in an odd place. It was in Tunstall, Stoke-on-Trent. I mean, we'd have to get a train to Derby and then Derby to Crewe and jump off at Longport railway station and walk a mile up the hill. And it was a residential street.
As you turned into Hoe Street in the queue, and this was a built-up terraced house residential area, you would hear the bump, bump, bump of the sound of the Torch. And that's what it was. It was almost like the building was shaking and shaking everything else around it. The magic as you turned into the street was just phenomenal, and then you just couldn't wait to get inside the club.
The Golden Torch for me was everything because it was my first ever all-nighter. We were young and we've decided that we did not want to know the charts by this time. You know, there was another chart, our chart, and we wanted, whilst in 1972 it might have been Slade and Little Willie by The Sweet, we wanted Duke Brown, A Crying Over You, and Nolan Chance, Just Like the Weather. They were our top sounds. That was our top 20.
In just over a year, the Torch helped reunify the underground Northern Soul scene. But it was in a town 50 miles away where this growing movement would be absolutely transformed. Wigan was once a major manufacturing powerhouse in the north, but the town's cotton and coal industries had been in severe decline for decades. Russ Winstanley was a local Wigan DJ and soul fan.
I heard in early '73 that the all-nighters were finishing at the Torch in Stoke. So I decided to have a look round for a venue.
The Wigan Casino had been built in the early part of the 20th century.
The casino was just perfect, fabulous sprung dance floor, massive areas to it, held about 3,500 to 4,000. The very first night at Wigan Casino was frightening, it was amazing, it was incredible. And I always remember thinking, when we got over the 500 mark, September 23rd now, 1973, if we get to Christmas, I'll be really mad.
Wigan logistically, what a great place. Have you been to Wigan train station? It's fantastic. You can go anywhere from Wigan trains. You can get to Wigan. It's on the motorway. It was perfect. And they never looked back from then on, and it just went bigger and bigger and bigger.
In the same year the all-nighters started at the Wigan Casino, Ian Levine went on one of his regular family holidays to Miami. But rather than soaking up the sun, he spent all his time digging for old 1960s soul records in a huge, dimly lit charity store.
I would at 9 in the morning till they closed at 6, and each day I carried a cardboard box of records home. By the 9 days had finished, I'd bought 4,000 records from them.
He was going out there every day, going to places, finding records, that thirst for knowledge, looking at a label and instantly knowing that it could be a goer.
When we left Miami with my 4,000 records, we were on a tiny little 2-engine propeller plane to go to the Bahamas. And these 4,000 records were on board this little plane, and the pilots took off and he couldn't get any height. And he started to say, I can't get the plane up, the records, those crates are too heavy. And my dad erupted, and he said he was going to open the door of the plane and throw the great big chests of records, they were like tea chests, 4,000 of them, into the sea. And I begged him not to. I'm pleading, it's the best records I've ever found, please don't. He says, the plane can't take off.
Thankfully, Ian wasn't forced to ditch his 4,000 singles into the ocean to save his family's life.
The find of those records was the greatest significant find of the Northern Soul scene, because every big record from 73 and 74 came out of that find. The greatest haul ever.
After safely returning to his hometown of Blackpool with his huge vinyl haul, Ian Levine was now a much sought-after DJ. Colin Curtis had started a new Northern Soul night at Blackpool Mecca's Highland Room, and he invited Ian to join him as resident DJ.
That haul from Goodwill left me on a pedestal above Wigan or anybody. Nobody could compete with those records because I found so many at once. Every week I was coming up with new monster stompers that were absolute quintessential bare essence of what Northern Soul is all about.
It was easy to generate excitement in the Highland Room because of the low roof, because of the style of music, and the up-tempo music just kept that air of tension, that air of excitement up at that level, and hand clapping, spinning. It was just the whole thing was just exciting.
Still remember my heart beating as I went up the escalator to the Highland Room. One of the most exciting clubs I've ever been to in my life.
My girl, you're just too darn soulful. Oh, yeah.
As we moved into the early 70s then, you would have the Blackpool Mecca and you would have Wigan Casino as the two leading lights of Northern Soul.
A healthy rivalry developed between these two clubs, which helped fan the gospel across the region.
The people you were playing to all knew where they would go to. Are you going to go here next Saturday? I'll see you at there on Sunday. That's going on next week. There's an all-day at Whitchurch. You didn't have to advertise. Everybody knew the DJs. I remember the adverts we used to put in the Max. All we did was put the songs we were playing, because that's all everybody wanted to know. What songs is Pete Waterman playing that Colin isn't playing, or Ian isn't playing, or Russ Winstanley? And he found a record that was different.
Alongside the music, a unique visual style was emerging.
We would go to Burton's and order suits with 6 pockets, 30 buttons, white trousers with seams in, turn-ups. Fashion and music were connected.
Very much was, you know, the baggy trousers, the brown shoes, the jacket, the shirt, the badge, keep the faith.
It was total escapism. It was nothing like what you did in the week. The experience of going to an all-nighter in a different town and meeting all these different sorts of people and having this kind of drive to like be better and better at dancing or better at collecting records was such an attractive proposition compared to what was set out for you.
It kind of propelled you through everything else. Even if you had a crap job, Monday to Friday, you could go on autopilot and just live for the weekends.
And it's dancing your tears away and dancing your pain away. You're on the dance floor dancing to a dance beat, but you're hearing this singer singing about a lost love, the pain of life, a heartbreak. I'm going to have a good time and leave all my heartbreak and all my pain behind. That bittersweet feeling of good times to escape from the bad times.
You know, you've got one night a week and you're going to just do everything that you wanted to do all week in that one night.